Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you all, wherever you might be. Please, as a note, please do remember to keep yourselves on mute. You'll hear me say that quite a lot through the webinar, but it's really great to have you all here and welcome you to the second in a series of 5 webinars we are holding over the coming months. And this is part of, as you can see on the screen in front of you, a joint ALNAP and Global Alliance webinar series titled Towards Stronger Urban Crisis Prevention, Response and Resilience. So my name is James Shell. I'm the Urban and Settlements Program Manager at Impact Initiatives, a part of the Alliance. And by extension, I'm also the Secretariat Coordinator for the Alliance. And maybe for those of you who are less familiar, the Global Alliance, it was established outside of the World Humanitarian Summit, or as part of the World Humanitarian Summit. And it's a global, multidisciplinary community of practice, and it brings together humanitarian and development actors, local authorities, private sector, and academia. And its reason for being is essentially to strengthen urban crisis prevention, response, recovery, and of course, resilience. So I'm really pleased to be your co-host for today. And alongside me is Leah from ALNAP. Leah.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Leah Campbell, and I'm a Senior Research Officer at ALNAP. ALNAP is a network of humanitarian organizations, and we exist to try and improve humanitarian response through learning. And we have an ongoing work stream, as we call it, about urban humanitarian response, and are also a founding member of the Global Alliance for Urban Crises. It's my job to give a bit of housekeeping information. So just as people continue to join us, thanks everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, as James has mentioned, please do keep yourselves on mute through the webinar. We have 3 great speakers I'll be introducing you to later on, and there'll be lots of chances to ask them questions. The way you can do that is to type them into the chat box rather than joining us by audio, because we've only tested the audio connection with all of our speakers, and if we all start jumping in, it might get a bit confusing. We have also a number of questions that you and others submitted in the registration process, so we'll be using those to kick things off. So if you have a question at any point for any of our speakers, submit it using the chat function, and I'll be keeping an eye on that and getting to as many of those questions as we possibly can. We are also, as James mentioned, recording the webinar, and so you'll be able to access it later on if you want to refer to it or share it with colleagues, and that'll be on both the Global Alliance and ALNAP websites. Back to you, James.
Thanks so much, Leah. So as you can see, today in the webinar, and as you would have read in recent emails, the focus is essentially unpacking engagement between, I would say, predominantly international humanitarian and development actors and local authorities. We will essentially unpack what are we seeing in practice, what are we seeing today, and what have we learnt or not learnt as a sector. And we'll touch on some of these challenges, some of these lessons, but what we want to do is really focus on the good practice examples. And for that, we have local authority partners in 3 contexts that you'll hear from shortly today. But before we do pass to the speakers, I wanted to spend just a few minutes to frame the topic. And if we look at humanitarian action, also extending to development program, and you can see in front of you on the slide, we're seeing an important but quite a long overdue focus on ensuring the localization of aid. And a tagline, if we can call it, that sums that up is as local as possible, as international as necessary, and that still rings true. And we see that this is occurring this movement has momentum at a global level, and many of you may have been involved in the Grand Bargain work stream on localization, but also at a country level. And we're seeing an increased focus of some civil society organizations, NGOs and international organizations moving in this direction. Progress has been made, of course, but much more to do. And I would say a lot of the time this momentum is being directed towards whether it's engagement with or access to finance by national governments and by civil society or national NGOs. And that's important, and we reiterate the need for that. But we hear less of this discussion in relation to local authorities. And when you look at, and I'd be curious when we open the discussion, when you look at large cities or towns, very often those urban centres are administered by legitimate and credible local authorities. And the local authorities that are responsible for the well-being of those, if we can call them citizens, or those residing in those urban centres. And not just for the short, but the medium and the long term. And I think what we see is to date, especially in humanitarian action, it's been, you could say at best, less than ideal. And what we've been hearing and seeing as part of the Global Alliance is local authorities often feel sidelined in humanitarian response efforts. And this is really the reason for one of the focus areas of the Alliance. And I'm not going to speak through what you see in the slide in front of you, but over the last few years, and these aren't anything new, we've crystallized what are the barriers. But speak to one or two of those. Obviously, we're talking about different languages, and that's not just languages. That's not just languages, whether it's English or French, but it's how we speak as a sector, the jargon that we use. We often operate to different time frames. I'm just going to ask if anyone has not yet popped themselves on mute. Could you possibly do that? Fantastic. So you see in front of you different drivers and different barriers. And these need to be unpacked. We need to discuss these. And the last thing I wanted to highlight, just before we move on to the speakers, which is why we're here, is to also highlight that when we look at local authorities, just as when we look at humanitarian actors, there is such diversity. And some boxes on the screen that have just appeared in front of you attempt to highlight that. So for example, to what degree a local authority is working in a centralized or a decentralized system, and therefore to what degree do they have the autonomy to make decisions? To what degree are they elected officials or appointed officials, and therefore by extension, to what degree do they represent their constituency? What's the capacity available to them internally? And I think a big issue which will need a bit more of a focus moving forward is when in cases of conflict, when a local authority is party to conflict, what are the implications for the humanitarian and development actors? So these are, again, not to answer today, but just to highlight that there's a lot of nuance. And the last thing I will say before we hand over is this has really been one of the reasons for the Global Alliance to bring together these different stakeholder groups. And so the Alliance is working towards a product or a process to strengthen this. And I'll touch on this after we've had the presentations and the speakers, but I wanted to highlight that this is part of the work of the Global Alliance, and we'd really encourage your involvement in that. So I think for now you've heard enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Leah, who will introduce you to our speakers, and then I really look forward to the conversations that will follow. So Leah, over to you.
Great. Hello again. So, a few years ago, I think 3 years ago, ALNAP has an ongoing urban webinar series, and we had a webinar about engaging with municipal actors, similar topic to this one. And we had a few different speakers on the webinar, and it went well, but the overwhelming feedback we got is, great webinar, but it would have been great to hear from local authorities themselves. All the speakers that we had were from humanitarian organizations. And so one of the great things about the session today and about the Alliance in general are the relationships and connections that the Alliance has built with different local authorities in places around the world that are facing very different crises. And so today we have a great lineup of speakers, three different speakers working in local authorities in very different contexts. So I'm going to briefly introduce each of them now. The first today of our speakers is Innocent Silver. Innocent is the projects coordinator for the Kampala Capital City Authority. Alongside his project management role, he also leads the City of Kampala's initiative to develop a comprehensive strategy on displacement, migration, resettlement, and urban refugees. And we'll be hearing from Innocent in just a moment. We also have with us here Dr. Dionysia Lambiri, who works with the Cities Network for Integration, which is an initiative supported by the IOM, which is an intermunicipal network of Greek municipalities who work together to organize and implement coordinated activities and interventions, both at local and national level, which aim to promote social integration of migrants and refugees and strengthen social cohesion. Prior to this, Dionysia was the coordinator of the City of Athens Coordination Center for Migrant and Refugee Issues. And last but not least, we have also with us Mr. Edrees Salih, Executive Director of the Board of Relief and Humanitarian Affairs, which is part of Dohuk Governorate in Iraq, which is the provincial government initiative based in Dohuk province. So we are going to first hear from Innocent, and because of the nature of internet connections, Innocent's presentation is going to be shared with you. It was pre-recorded. However, Innocent is here with us today and will be participating in the Q&A, but just for continuity of sound, we pre-recorded it so that we wouldn't have any technical issues today. So James is about to load that up, and so we will first hear from Innocent.
Okay, hello, good afternoon. My name is Innocent Silva, speaking to you from Kampala. I work for Kampala Capital City Authority, which is an agency that was established through an act of the Ugandan Parliament in 2011, which really takes care of the affairs of administering the city of Kampala, which is the capital city of Uganda, on behalf of central government. Kampala as a city is host to about 100,000 registered refugees. This is the official number from UNHCR and the Office of the Prime Minister. But by the city's own estimation, we also host about 200,000 alien migrants. These also include the unregistered members of refugee households. Most of the people that we are talking about live in Kampala's 32 odd informal settlements, obviously putting a lot of pressure on the fragile ecosystems, including wetlands, lake shores, and swampy areas, as well as pressure also on the very inadequate and heavily subscribed public services like education, health, water, and sanitation. Now, the influx of these refugees has been well over 35 years and spanning over conflicts in very many countries surrounding us. Countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Southern Sudan, Burundi, Congo, and even Kenya. So we have a mixed bag of nationalities here, of refugees whom we have taken care of for the last 35 years. In the last 3 years, the numbers have really increased due to the recent conflicts in Southern Sudan, as well as the troubles that we have had in the Democratic Republic of Congo, who are our neighbors to the west. Now, several humanitarian actors have over the years been involved in responding to the needs of refugees in our city. These responses have mostly been in the areas of livelihoods, including interventions in cash for food. There have been some in legal aid, micro-enterprise development, and also language and literacy classes, because Uganda is an English-speaking country, and some of our neighbors are Francophone countries. So the refugees who come here sometimes are not able to speak the local languages or English, which is the biggest language of communication. These interventions have, over the years, really not been in coordination with the local authority. They have mostly been at grassroots level with the initiative of the various international and national organizations working directly with refugee community groups at the very basic household level. There have also been a lot of initiatives from central government through the Office of the Prime Minister, but those also tend to work directly with the intervening organizations and at household level. So to a large extent, we can say that the local authorities have really been left out in this response to refugees. The other thing to note is that most of the responses have really been from a humanitarian emergency response perspective. So we have had, the typical emergency response and very little sort of long-term planning development responses. In the last 2 years, the city of Kampala established what we call here the Kampala for All Forum, which is a multidisciplinary platform for coordinating the activities of all agencies involved in responding to refugees in the city of Kampala. The forum takes the form of quarterly coordination meetings, which have been, which are chaired by KCCA, but are also attended by various, a wide spectrum of stakeholders, including UN agencies, international NGOs, local NGOs, civil society groups, refugee-led organizations, local NGOs, businesses, and all other actors in between. Through this initiative, the city has managed to establish partners, mutually beneficial partnerships, with organizations that have helped the city to better understand the needs of refugees and integrate them into the long-term development plans for the city. Organizations like the IRC have supported the city council in in an advisory role on how to better understand the needs of displaced, marginalized people. We have had expertise from Impact Initiatives, an organization which has helped us to better understand the socio-economic structure and of the various categories of refugees, including where they live, and other, other aspects of their socio-economics. We have also worked with the IOM, the UN Migration Agency, who are working in some of our very marginalized communities, particularly on issues of preventing radicalization of young people. There is other organizations that are involved in literacy programs, in legal aid programs, and also in supporting refugees to become self-sufficient. This has been a beneficial partnership so far. It is definitely a positive partnership. The city has been helped to better understand the peculiarities of these displaced populations, especially because some of them really fell through the cracks, especially we are looking at the unregistered members of refugee households who are not captured in the development planning figures for the city, like census figures, for example. They do not capture those, but also because they are not officially registered, they also do not appear on the refugees register. There is no requirement for registration to become a citizen of this city. So because of that lapse, there's been a lot of gaps in terms of planning for service provision for these numbers. But through the work of organizations like Impact Initiatives, for example, we are now better able to appreciate and understand the needs and vulnerabilities of these marginalized populations. Well, the advantages have not come without their shortfalls. There are serious limitations, we think, in terms of the different outlooks of humanitarian actors, in terms of their planning, which is very short term. Usually it is very specific. It is limited to a few areas. It is by and large pilots in nature, with very specific funding cycles and deadlines. We find that however useful it is, development work really, unlike the emergency humanitarian work, requires sort of a different approach to that. It requires longer term planning, flexibility in terms of programming, and to a large extent significantly larger budgets than what is available to humanitarian actors. Perhaps if as these partnerships continue to grow, indeed as we expect, if we could start to look at how we can mutually reinforce each other in terms of looking at response to refugees and other displaced populations through a more long-term development lens, through looking at a whole of society approach and not just a targeted approach looking at the specific persons of interest, as we call them, but sort of looking at a wider area-based development approach. We think that the benefits that have accrued from this partnership will go even further. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Innocent, and hopefully everyone enjoyed the first presentation. We're going to hand next to Dionysia, so to move from Kampala over to Greece, and so I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Leah. I hope that everyone can everyone hear me, James? I'm not sure.
I can hear you perfectly, Dionysia.
Okay, yep. Great. Thank you very much. Yes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you my experience from working with the City of Athens, where we implemented a very innovative and a new project which engaged both local authority, the City of Athens, and humanitarian actors that are active in Athens. First of all, the first slide, James, thank you. A bit of the background for Athens. Following the outbreak.
Can I ask you all to pop yourselves on mute? I'll try to find the mute all button, but sorry for interruption. Dionysia, continue, please.
Thank you. So, following the outbreak of the refugee crisis in the summer of 2015, the City of Athens really found itself in the forefront of an unprecedented crisis for Greece and Europe overall, because Athens became, in reality, the biggest European city of transit and has seen the greatest influx of refugees. So the city was under extreme pressure to provide fast and practical solutions, and this required really a political will. Today the needs are very complex and they range from temporary accommodation all the way to integration. So you can see in your pictures in front of you, people arriving in Athens back in 2015, staying homeless in the streets, and now we have now moved to a situation where their kids are going to school, and we are not anymore discussing about just a humanitarian response, but we are discussing about integration. So this is the challenge now, amongst other things. So let's move to the next slide to see how the city of Athens has designed its response to this. So the main pillars of the City of Athens strategic plan for integrating these newcomers in Athens is, first of all, to understand what the current situation was and to identify which were the key stakeholders which could help the City of Athens that had no experience in dealing with these issues, and establish a collaboration framework. Then, moving on the right box on the top side, what we needed to do is do a needs assessment and start planning interventions, and this meant that we needed to start discussing what changes we needed to do in terms of on the institutional side, but also on the service provision side. And then we see that the then mayor of Athens decided, and this was a political decision, to appoint a vice mayor specifically looking at migrant and refugee affairs. Under him, to establish an integration directorate that was where people working on social issues were employed, and then started let's say putting together a proposal for the development of centers for migrant integration. Then, as a next step of this pillar, was to start developing new tools and processes and new ways to provide services that could cater for the needs of these populations. And then, as a final stage, and this is all these pillars, as you can understand, work and feed one another. They work in parallel to start developing a framework of collaboration between international organizations, local NGOs, and other municipalities as well, in order to create partnerships and to create mutual support. As you can see in all these pillars, the main thing that builds them together, brings them together, and as you will see in the next slide, is synergies, collaboration between different stakeholders at different levels. Next slide, please, James. So this slide basically describes our project, the Athens Coordination Center for Migrant and Refugee Issues, that was established in June 2017. This is a public-private partnership, so the initiative was the City of Athens initiative, so the mayor decided to do that, so it had the strategy and implementation side. Then we got private funding from a big donor in Greece, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. And then an NGO, a Greek NGO, was responsible for the coordination and fund management of this process. So we created this center. I will explain in the next slide the structure of this center. And what we did is that in reality, we invited all different stakeholders at different levels that worked in Athens in providing services to migrants and refugees. And through a bottom-up participatory approach, we became really the physical as well as the institutional space where all these different actors met and collaborate and develop synergies with the City of Athens. Next slide, please, James. What's the structure of ACCMR, the Athens Coordination Center? We worked in 6 working committees, and all of them in order to promote and to help collaboration between the municipality and the international and local organizations. All these committees were co-chaired by one member of an NGO or an international organization and a municipal body. You can see the different thematics that we used. These were not in random. These were aligned with the municipal structure. So we had a committee working on access and legal rights, livelihoods, urbanization, education, health and well-being, and an umbrella working group on women, refugees, and gender issues. When we first started back in June 2017, we had more or less 35 different stakeholders participating. Now we have over 90 different members, where over 300 different representatives from these organizations work together with the City of Athens and develop synergies with the city of Athens. To give you an example about the co-chairing that I mentioned before, the Education and Learning Working Committee was some months ago co-chaired by UNICEF and the Vice Mayor for the Child, the city of Athens. Similarly, the Women, Refugees, Gender Issues Working Group was co-chaired by the Vice Mayor of Social Solidarity and a local NGO called Melissa, the Melissa Network. Just to give you some examples. Next slide, please, James, to give an idea of what we have established as in under less than 2 years of operation. First of all, ACCMR has been recognized as a best practice at European level. We have been mentioned in recent OECD report, the World Economic Forum report. But most importantly, apart from this, European recognition, is that we managed to start development, to put the foundations of a culture of collaboration and co-creation between the city of Athens, that is traditionally introvert, and local and international NGOs, international organizations that are often quite skeptical about collaborating with local organizations. They think they are slow, they think they are really bureaucratic, which is true, but there are a lot of benefits from that. And as a result of this collective and bottom-up process of collaboration, we managed to develop through a really participatory model, the first preparedness mechanism for future refugee flows for Athens, the first strategic action plan for integration for the city of Athens, a number of proposals for initiatives. We conducted trainings and capacity building events with local groups and migrant communities. And all this have been through a 100% participatory process. At every stage of the process, we had the input both from the municipality and from NGOs and international organizations. More recently, we have managed to, the ACCMR has put the basis for the Cities Network for Integration, which is a network of 13 different municipalities that collaborate in exchanging know-how and supporting each other in the development of integration initiatives. Again, for this, in order for this initiative to be successful, we initially had funding from the IRC, and this cities network is currently supported by the IOM. Next slide, please, James. Very quickly, and to highlight this, this local focus, on this slide I describe what are the Cities Network for Integration founding pillars and how the IOM is currently supporting this initiative of Greek municipalities. As you can see on the left-hand side, the basis of this network is supports local knowledge and expertise. It's not creating things from scratch. It's not building new services, new units. It's trying to empower what is already there in these municipalities, and this is extremely important for this cities network. Creating tools, helping create processes that have always, where the bottom line is always the local priorities, the priorities that are identified from the municipalities themselves, not something that a big organization comes to tell them how to, what your priorities are. This is very important. So the IOM at the moment is supporting this network by facilitating the coordination between the municipalities, by organizing trainings either with partners, with UNICEF, for instance, or with experts, and in general facilitating information sharing and mapping also of services and needs at the local level. To give you an idea, next slide, James, please. To give you an idea of what we have been doing so far is that we have we have created local groups where local stakeholders participate in every of the 13 municipalities. We are assisting them in developing local action plans for integration. We have created methodological guides for the development of coordination tools, of strategic tools, and we are also doing a mapping of needs. And here in front of you, you can see like an aggregate figure that shows what are the priority areas where intervention is needed, based on the input that we have had from the municipalities. So you can see that they have needs on education and language courses for the refugees living in their communities, employability issues, they need training for the staff, etc. So you can see that it's really, really important, because we can then have a whole picture of municipalities in Greece that host refugees. Next slide, please, James. So very briefly, and I'm sure we can all have the time to discuss this further, some final thoughts from my experience on engagement between local authorities and humanitarian actors. They very well complement each other. Local authorities often need the skills that international organizations and local NGOs have, so they need to complement each other. And this, you can see this increasingly reflected in several donor-funded initiatives that encourage this collaboration. The main, at least from my experience in Greece, the main area where local governments and NGOs are most likely to work together is the area of social services, so help in providing more accessible social services. But of course, there are more areas of collaboration, capacity building. And I give you, in the next slide, I give you an idea. We recently conducted, not so recently, back at the end of 2017, we conducted a study with refugees living in Greece, but also with Athenians, with people living in Athens, where we asked them, do you think that the refugees that will remain in Greece could or could not be integrated eventually in the Greek society? And you can see that the majority are quite skeptical, are quite, they have their worries about whether these people can be integrated. And here is an idea of where international organizations can help and can change this mind frame and understand the reasons why there is this type of attitude, and explore it more, use empirical data to explore it more, and help local authorities to start changing the narrative about that. As a final thought about the challenges ahead, as Innocent said, I fully agree with him. This pilot-based approach to integration, project-based approach to integration is a problem, a huge problem. There are many risks linked with short-term solutions, because working with local authorities takes time. If you want to mainstream whatever you create, it takes time. So you cannot have projects that last 1 year, 2 years, etc. Because especially this is what we are viewing now. We are experiencing in Greece now. We have changes in political priorities. So if you don't mainstream and if you don't establish change, things disappear from 1 year to the other. The second challenge ahead is building trust and understanding between all stakeholders involved. So when I say that, I mean understanding on both sides. This common language thing is extremely important. And in my view, and this is something that I've seen, is we all often discuss about, mayors, the will of the mayor, etc. It's not just the mayors. It's also the involvement of middle management in decision-making processes, because it's the public servant, the head of a unit, that will take decisions and need to convince the people that work under him to be more open and to provide a certain service or the other. So you need to involve middle management. And finally, understanding the important role that local authorities can play. Sometimes municipalities are not in the center of this, of funding of international funds. Sometimes funding does not flow directly to cities where they need and they have the expertise. So we need to consider municipalities in the design of funding flows. As a final, last point, which is minor but it is quite important, is what I have found in Greece is that NGOs that are migrant-led need further empowerment in order to be in a position to complement effectively local government initiatives. And international organizations can play a role in empowering migrant-led NGOs. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And we will move now to our final speaker today, Mr. Edrees. So I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much. I am Edrees Salih, Executive Director of BRHA. I am speaking from Dohuk, Iraqi Kurdistan. Today I'm going to focus on and to talk about Dohuk initiative as a good practice. Next. Before that, I have to give you an introduction about Dohuk Governorate. It's one of the smallest provinces in Iraq in terms of area and population, but still hosting more than 600,000 IDPs and refugees who have fled violence and unrest in Iraq and Syria. Total population of Dohuk Governorate before the displacement was 1,500,000, more than 1,500,000. Currently, Dohuk hosts 24% of all IDPs overall Iraq. Dohuk hosts as well 35% of total Syrian refugee population overall Iraq. Currently, we have 21 formal camps inhabited with IDPs and refugees. 17 camps are for IDPs and 4 camps for Syrian refugees. So, if you see the percentage of IDPs and refugees again with the host community, you can see that 71% are host community now, 25% are IDPs, and 4% are refugees. So, 2 in 7 persons living in Dohuk either is refugee or IDPs. Next, please. The Dohuk initiative, we can say that it is unique in Iraq. It is a unique process in Iraq and even in Kurdistan. But this initiative is just started in Dohuk. Even in other 2 governorates or provinces in Kurdistan, it is not available. This board. During the displacement crisis in August 2014, the governor, His Excellency the Governor of Dohuk, has decided, as per the request from the Prime Minister of the KRG, to form a Board of Relief and Humanitarian Affairs, which an institution to manage and to run all these humanitarian and development cooperation with the UN agencies and humanitarian actors. The other good practice was that a mechanism was set to involve all relevant government entities, I mean the municipal, who are providing municipal and social services in Dohuk, to be a member of this board. So general directors of municipalities, of the health, water, electricity, police, security, education, social, all of those are members of the board. And in the executive directorate, during these departments, they have their representative even in the implementation of the project and in coordinating the programs with our partners of humanitarian and development actors. Even the civil society, national NGOs, businessmen, religious community leaders, all of those have been approached and encouraged to participate in the Dohuk initiatives. So the main purpose of our initiative was that, and still it is just the strengthening the government-led network or the leadership of the government in managing the crisis in the Dohuk Governorate. Next, please. So BRHA is a governmental body within the Dohuk structure, established in 2015. It is the main, as I said, main counterpart of UN agencies, humanitarian development actors, for providing services and even running the coordination. Objective, it is that efficient cooperation and coordination. It is to provide equal assistance to all people without any discrimination, and even to ensure the cost effective and high quality services. So please next. BRHA structure, as I mentioned, that it is the board. It is under the direct supervision of the governor of Dohuk. Then we have the board itself. As I said, there are the general directors of all the governmental institution in Dohuk are members of this board. Then we have the executive director, which is I am the executive director of that department. We are doing the implementation of the projects. So if you see the main task of the board, it is mainly coordination, setting up policies, priorities, annual plans for the city in coordination with all these municipal departments. Again, even we are advocating for having governmental budget and even to control and to manage these budgets from the government and non-governmental budget as well. And even now we have a partnership with UNHCR to manage all these camps. We, as a board, we are managing the camps in close coordination and partnership with UNHCR, which I can consider it as a good practice that UNHCR has handed over the responsibility of the camp management to the local government. So under the executive director, you know that we have in each mayoralty we have districts, 7 districts in Dohuk. In each district we have an operation room there dealing and providing assistance to the non-camp IDPs and refugees. As you might be aware that 60% of our IDPs and refugees are living outside the camps. Next, please. Why the engagement of local government in urban crisis is important, or I can say even it is essential. Everywhere, the understanding it is, I think the government knows better than the humanitarian actors, the impacted communities with regard to the history of the conflict, culture, diversity, language, all this. I think the government, local government is well positioned to understand this. Then the government departments, institution, there are processes, skills, expertise, financial, technical resources, human resources, that this could be all together and to aggregate the support and impact of this support. The other one is always, you know, that sustainability is a key issue for all programs. Involving or engagement of local government will ensure the efficient sustainability, and even any project require approvals, acceptance from local authority. So for this point as well, the engagement of local government is very essential. Even the impacted communities or displaced people, often they are respecting the government much more than the international community because of this the background or history and culture. So you know that most of our institutions, government institutions, municipalities, health, education, they have their own plans for their areas, for their cities. So I think engagement of these departments with the initiatives of the humanitarian partners, I think it will help to have a kind of bridge to link the humanitarian with the development plans, programs of the city. In addition, that engagement of the government, I think, will ensure somehow avoiding duplication and even increase accountability to the affected population. Please, next. In Dohuk, we can say that we have some good achievements or successes in dealing with this. As you might be aware, we have faced many crises at the same time. Financial crisis, fighting with the ISIS, and even the displacement, all together came in the same time. So I think we can say that we have been successful in ensuring better living condition, proper protection, with the dignity provided with the dignity to all IDPs and refugees. sustainability. Many of our governmental employees been trained by our partners. Many assets, many equipment, machineries being donated by our partners through this Dohuk initiative to our municipal and social directories in Dohuk. As you know, that having together or making together all these resources from the national, international, and from the government in a single network will, of course, will contribute to have efficient response and management and even greater impact. We can see in the field, in the ground, that aggregated contribution between local government and humanitarian development actors, as I said, will have a greater impact on the affected population. Duplication will not be there. We can link between the plans of the government with regard to the urban planning with this humanitarian. So I mean that it will contribute to the resilience of the government and even of the host community, in addition to IDP and refugees. Please, next. Please. Please, next.
I think it is the next slide, no?
No, it's not. No, still we have. So we have some other slides.
Okay, so let me go to the following slide then.
Yes, the challenges.
Yep.
I don't know if this is the right slide or not. Yes, okay. Centralization in the government finance and administration system, it is, I think, a key challenge in front of localization and in front of the engagement of local government. In Iraq, the system is like that, and even in Kurdistan, that mostly the structure is somehow centralized, and decentralization is essential and it's recommended. International community, they have their own system in coordination. They are depending on the interagency meeting and they have set up cluster meetings, which is somehow it is parallel it is parallel, or you can say that it is a duplication of the coordination that the government is asking for. I think even the coordination should be done by the local government. We in Dohuk somehow we've been successful in collecting all the partners, more than 100 NGO and UN agencies working in here in monthly coordination meeting, and even we are participating in the cluster meetings. But still, I think this should be should be localized more, and to give the leadership of this coordination to the government. A lack of trust from both sides. I can say that most of the international NGOs, UN agencies, they don't have that trust on the local government, and we cannot deny that even the government, local government, and most of the government, they don't have that trust on some of the international community institutions or organization. So this there is a lack of trust. This is one of the challenges. Priorities, as you might be aware, of course, each organization is they have their own list of priorities. The government has its own list of priorities. So always there is a different list. But still, we as a government, we are asking to pay more attention to the list of priorities which is produced by the government, as we consider ourselves that we understand our community and the affected population more than the others. Lack of communication and information sharing, it is a challenge. I can give you an example that most of our partners, they are not sharing the list of beneficiaries with the government. They can share with each other as international NGOs, but with the government not. This maybe you can understand it if it is happened in some non-state countries or maybe in some areas. that there are militias controlling the areas, this area or that area. Maybe the sharing information will affect the beneficiaries, but still, in our situation in Iraqi Kurdistan, we don't have that problem. I think sharing information is very essential to build trust, at least between the government and international community. You know that the international communities always, they are somehow paying more attention to their donors, standards, guidance, or requirements, and they are more accountable to their donors rather than to the affected population or even to the local government. So many times when we are asking them for something, they are saying, no, this is the donor requirements, we cannot do this, you cannot do this. So they are not listening that much to the local government requirements. If I'm going to talk about Dohuk, particularly in Dohuk province, this rampant increase in the population have put a big strain and pressure on the already fragile infrastructure of the public services. Most of the humanitarian partners, they are focusing on emergency projects, and they are not paying that attention or focus to the resilience or the resilience-based projects. So that's one of the challenges as well. Next, please. Lesson learned. Local governments always, it is well positioned to mobilize all these resources, the resource experiences, skills, motivations, and to be in a position to have a better leadership of this humanitarian response and development. If you come to the ground, I think no one can implement any project without approval, acceptance from the local government. So that means that local engagement of local government is legally, administratively, the government is well positioned to lead this coordination, and even it is better for the humanitarian actors to ensure the acceptance of their project, sustainability in the future. So all these are better for both sides. And even the local government can benefit from this leadership or coordination or engagement of the local government to implement some of its own plans with regard to the urbanization and the program related to the development of the city. They can link between the humanitarian and development initiatives to benefit the host community and even the plans of the city as well. So this, I don't know, maybe I have some recommendation in the next slide, please. James, please. So here I think, as I said, the Dohuk initiative of creation of BRHA, it's been locally just by the government of Dohuk, but this should be, I think, institutionalized, the engagement of local government in the KRG, I mean the government of Kurdistan, and even in national level, to be recognized by them in national level in Iraq federal government. Of course, strengthen the capacity of the government institutions in urban areas is needed, is required. This should be taken into account when the international community are formalizing their proposals to provide more assistance with regard to the capacity building to the governmental employees. Building trust, this I told you, the trust is the key point between the international community and the local government. So we have all to work to build trust for all the stakeholders, government, UNHCR, international donors, private sector, all of them. They have to trust each other for having efficient crisis management. Of course, this BRHA or other governmental institutions, they have to they need support to develop their internal and external strategy, and to be in better situation how to deal with the linkage between the humanitarian and development plans. So support to localization, this is very important point. This, I think, this should be, we have to approach the donors to pay more attention to this point, to localize the leadership, and even to have direct implementation, direct agreements, partnership with the local government. Why to be through a third line? No, should be direct between the donors and the local government. That's what I have. Thank you very much for listening to me. Hope I've been able to give you somehow a clear picture about the Dohuk initiative. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much to all three of our speakers and to all of you who've been submitting questions. I want to say keep doing so, although our list of questions is growing long and we now only have 25 minutes. So we're going to jump right in and go to Innocent for our first question. And this is one that was submitted in advance by one of you. Innocent, the question is about all of the work that local civil society organizations, are doing before and after humanitarian actors kind of arrive. Particularly given the reflection in your presentation about the short-term nature of a lot of the projects that you've seen humanitarian actors in Kampala be involved in. Do you have any thoughts about how humanitarian or development actors can better support the ongoing work that's being done by local civil society in cities, such as the work done in Kampala, in order to support urban refugees there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Innocent.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think Edrees really just said it about humanitarian actors putting on a resilience lens in terms of how they deal with urban crises, not looking at them as necessarily events, but looking at interventions before in terms of preparation and prevention of foreseeable urban crises. During the crisis, in terms of how do they work not just alongside, but not just in parallel fashion, but work alongside the local authorities. And also after crisis, because that's the other thing. A lot of these crises are repeat crises. So building back better as well is about looking at how to prevent future crises from reoccurring, or when they reoccur, how to be better prepared to deal with them. Just as a final thought on reflection, I think humanitarian actors need to also look at, there's no better way to put this, but just supporting municipal budgets, not looking at dealing with these isolated incidents of urban crises or like refugee influxes, but supporting municipal budgets, not just working in project mode. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. I'm turning next to Dionysia to answer the question that someone posed just now about UNHCR. Given IOM was mentioned in two of the different projects here as supporting the initiatives, someone was interested about whether UNHCR had also provided support to any of these thoughts. And I know, Dionysia, you have had some good engagement with UNHCR in Athens, so over to you for a bit more about that.
Thank you, Leah. Yes, indeed. UNHCR has been supporting the local government of Athens quite a lot from the early stages, not only through the STA accommodation scheme, so basically assisting local authorities in housing asylum seekers in Athens, but also and importantly through a very close engagement for the design of trainings for local authority staff. So, for instance, in the newly established centers for migrant integration, where in reality these are one-stop shops for both migrants and refugees to get information on how to access services. There were many people that needed to be trained because they didn't know about the status, the difference in status of these people, and it was really important for them to understand and have a basic understanding of different statuses. So UNHCR has, in reality, co-designed together with the City of Athens a number of trainings, and this has meant that trainings were tailor-made for the needs of the local authority staff. So that was great. And as a next step, what we are planning to do now with UNHCR is to start developing an evidence-based tool in order to start really measuring integration. So basically start developing, using UNHCR expertise, to start developing local indicators for integration. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to now turn to a couple of different questions that came in advance, and one that's just come up in the chat as well. So bear with me, because this is a kind of long, complicated question. And it all kind of relates down to trust, really. You know, one of the things that international humanitarians often might say relating to engaging with any sort of government actor is kind of, you know, drawing on the humanitarian principles and the commitment to those. There might be concerns about the transparency of governments, whether the authority is representative of the affected people, and on the behalf of international actors arriving to a place where they're new and they're not familiar with who they can trust and who they can effectively work with. It's often hard to know, and so there might be then a kind of instinct to not engage with any level of government. On the other hand, you also have examples where local authorities are not interested in working with humanitarian or development actors. You know, for example, if the support that's offered by humanitarians is to a population that government don't recognize in places where refugees exist but are not, you know, there aren't efforts on behalf of government to integrate them, you know, very unlike the three cases we've just described here. So I wanted to ask all three of you, as who have managed to work effectively with humanitarian actors, do you have any advice either for your fellow local authorities who might be or uninterested in the or for humanity have been wary about engaging with local authorities? And I'll turn first to Edrees and then hear from others as well.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear me? Yeah? Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, okay, please. So I said one of the main challenges or key challenges engagement of local government is the trust, lack of trust between from both sides, from the government towards the international community and from them towards the local government. I think we have to work together to build a trust among ourselves. I think there are the government is not against any humanitarian principles. The government it is responsibility to provide protection to the affected population, to respect their rights. All this it is the duties and the commitment from the local government. But on the other side, there are, as you know, there are politics. It is everywhere. There are something related to the maybe constitution of Iraq. Maybe there is related to some politics environment in the country that cannot help the government to be very open to everything and to accept everything. For example, I'm going to give you an example. Now, I'm talking about the displacement people. The people who've been displaced to Dohuk, they came from the Nainawa plain, which is in Iraqi constitution, it is considered as a disputed area. Most of our international partners are asking the government, local government, and even the national government, how to provide or how to help in the integration of those people with the host community. This it is not under local government autonomy or power to decide on this, because the integration of the displaced people in Kurdistan or in Dohuk, somehow it is against an article in the constitution of Iraq that is saying that all Iraqis have the right of movement to any place in Iraq, but in condition not to lead to the demographic change, because still the disputed area still it is under discussion between the Iraqi federal government and KRG, I mean the Kurdistan regional government, how to solve this issue. So there are some issues it is not under the autonomy or the power of the local government. This should be discussed, I think, in higher level. I think there is no any obstacle from local government against provision of any humanitarian activities in Kurdistan. But I am saying that there is lack of trust. I fully agree with regard to the transparency of the government, regarding maybe even to the corruption-related issues. They have many concerns, but this should be discussed. And even the government, they have their own concerns about how the international community is working here in the region. So from both sides, I think we have all together, we have to work to build trust among ourselves. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. As a recap, the question is about.
Excuse me, sorry. Can I add something I thought about on the issue of trust as well?
Yes, I'm just going to recap the question.
Sorry.
Yeah. So the question is about trust, and so on kind of both sides, humanitarians might have concerns about the representativeness and whether they can trust working with government, and local authorities may be uninterested in working with humanitarians, either as Edrees suggests, they might have their own concerns about corruption, or perhaps they have a different view about particularly refugee or displaced people living in their area who they might not be interested in supporting. And so what advice do you have either for fellow local authorities or for humanitarian actors based on your experiences? Go ahead, Dionysia.
Hi, sorry for interrupting you earlier. Just three, as I was thinking about trust, I have three things that I have noticed. I mean, three practical things. First thing is, in order to start building trust, you need to give opportunities for interaction. For instance, you need to, when there are workshops organized or information events, you need to engage with local authority middle management or local authority employees, and start allowing space for interaction, so there is a better understanding. This, of course, means that you should not have language barriers. So it's quite important for this type of meetings to be held in the local language as much as possible, because not all local authority workers can speak English, and it might seem very strange, but it is true, and this is something we have found. The moment we changed our meetings in Greek, the interaction from local government was much higher, so it's quite important. And the other thing that we have found as extremely important is when you are creating tools to be used, for instance, by local governments, these tools needs to be created keeping in mind what tools the local government is familiar with. And to give you an example, when we started creating the preparedness plan, the contingency plan for the city of Athens for the case of future emergencies, what we did is that we used existing government documents. We didn't create something at a format that the local government was really unfamiliar with. You need to use the tools that local governments already have and enhance them and base your input on the tools that local governments already have so that they are better understood by local governments. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And finally, we'll turn to Innocent as well on this question.
Thank you very much. On the issue of trust building, well, first of all, we have talked a lot about the need for humanitarian actors not to work in project mode. Trust is really not built on a 6-month timeline or however long a project is supposed to be implemented. So this issue of working on timelines or deadlines and having things like trust building as an objective, I think is usually the first point, the first place where we set ourselves up for failure. So trust is, in my opinion and in my own experience, built from constant interactions through dealing with things and solving issues together, and really coming alongside and working with people. Just again to talk about how to bridge the gap. I think if humanitarian actors could consider more, what I have personally found helpful is when people are given to me as partners, and we sort of spend time together, work together, almost embedded into the into the daily life of the municipality that I work for, as opposed to sort of having these scheduled meetings where we meet and try to deal with issues in a 30-minute block of time, and then we think, oh, we've found solutions for it. Because I think we have got to start looking at some of these issues from a sort of more long-term perspective. Again, as Edrees said earlier, resilience, building resilience, not looking at things from an event time-based and deadline or timeline-based point of view. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Innocent. We've come to our last question now, in the interest of time. And the question I'll ask each of the panelists to reflect on is about the future, but I'd like to emphasize, because it's come up a bit in the chat as well, this particular aspect of bridging relationships between humanitarians and local authorities. So the question is, if you think through your own experience, what do you think are the main opportunities to ensure that we respond better to urban crises in the future? In particular, how do we achieve that bridging of relationships? So I'll turn first to Edrees and then hear from the rest of the speakers as well.
Okay, thank you. I think there is many opportunities to have this engagement and cooperation between the humanitarian actors and local governments or authorities. I think first we have to start from the local government. I think the government in all countries or regions, provinces, should have a specific and reliable governmental institution, to be specific, to deal with the humanitarian and development cooperation with international community. This is the first from the government side. And this institution or this department should be recognized even by the national government with clear autonomy, clear power, clear responsibility to be in a position to deal and run these activities. You hearing me? Hello? It's fine?
Yes.
Yes. The second point, then after this creation of this specific governmental institution, then we are going to work, as I said before, to build trust and to develop strategies between the humanitarian development actors and the government. Then after that, after we build the trust, after we have all these plans, strategic plans, policies, things, we are going, and the international community, donor funding countries should support the partnership, direct partnership with the government, not to be through a third side or a third partner. I think to be direct, the donor should rely on the local government to have direct partnership with them. Even UN agencies, they have to have direct partnership, memorandum of agreement, PPA, project partnership agreement with the local government to be in a position to implement their plans and to link between the humanitarian and development projects. In addition to that, the other opportunity is if the international community and the UN agency mostly, if they can plan with the local government to start with the government, the coordination with the government through the 5 stages of the programming, from the initiation of the concept of the project programs, planning stage as well to be with the government, but unfortunately so far they are coming to the government just during the implementation period, while the idea of the program, the plan of the program is not being shared with the government and not being discussed. So this, I can see that the opportunity is there from both sides. We have to work as local government and as well as the community. There is opportunity and many opportunities to have better cooperation. Thank you.
Thanks, Edrees. Dionysia, would you like to add anything about the prospects for the future?
I think that Edrees covered most of what I fully agree with his points and with the similar points made by Innocent earlier. It's this close and continuous cooperation and co-design between the humanitarian side and local government, which then results in trust and also in reality the support and somehow institutionalization of this cooperation in local government.
Great, thanks. And Innocent, any final words from yourself?
No, I think really everything has been said. It's really about co-creation. It is about partnership in the real sense of the word. It's about time, investing time. It's about sharing of resources, both human and otherwise. It's I look at it as partnership in the very sense of the word. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, everyone. James, back to you.
Again, thank you so much, everyone, and Leah, thank you for facilitating that really interesting discussion that we've just had there. We have 2 more minutes, and I'm going to ask or request an extra 2 minutes to finish just 2 minutes after time. But first, to reiterate what Leah said, thank you so much, Innocent, Dionysia, and Edrees for your inputs and quite nuanced reflections. I'm really glad we got to a level of discussion that we wanted to in the conversation, and thanks, Leah, for guiding that. Before we go, we've been speaking right now about what next. Where do we go from here? And I want to revert back to the beginning of this webinar, where we were talking about how can we scale up or strengthen this engagement between local authorities and humanitarian actors, not as an afterthought, not as objective 2 or 3 on a 6-month pilot, but to institutionalize it as a way of working, which, Dionysia, I noted that word that you used. And what you can see, one way to do that is what you can see in front of you on the slide is a work stream that the Global Alliance is currently involved in and its members. And it is essentially a propositional framework, and what we call a framework or a protocol of engagement. And its attempt is to institutionalize or make this engagement a normal way of working, not an afterthought. And it's attempting to point in a direction of this engagement, but knowing how different each context is, both from a humanitarian perspective, local authorities, and a larger context. So it's attempting not to be prescriptive. And whilst, and I will share the link in the box shortly, this is one of a series of technical products or technical resources that the Global Alliance has drafted earlier this year. And it speaks at both a global or a political level, which you'll see in the next slide, but it also talks about how can a mechanism like this be implemented at a city level. And just bear with me. I won't speak through this, but essentially this product has been developed over a 6-month period, 3 consultations in 3 different regions, and quite extensive interviews. And it's now under 2 tracks. The first is how can a global level, and that's looking at the Interagency Standing Committee and a global representative body of local authorities, and one of those is United Cities and Local Government. How can we bring those 2 key representative actors on board and support and or endorse this at a global level? And we're doing some work on that. But in parallel, that must, and even more so, needs to be contextualized and rolled out at a city level. And what we're looking at now is where are cities or urban centres where we can, and it's not necessarily about rolling out this framework, but establish a dialogue, and one that isn't necessarily project-bound or output-based, but let's say support or build off the frameworks that even could be existing already in Athens and Kampala, and attempt to say, what does this framework, what does this engagement look like in this city? And why I'm saying that is this is very much the beginning of, I would say, quite a long process. And I'm really opening a real open request to all of you. If you're interested in engaging in this, please reach out to us. And that could be at various levels, as you see up there, from a conceptual level about what do we need to include in such a framework. How can we engage others in the process? And 3, how can we bring this to the cities where we need to do this the most? So if you're interested, just follow that email, get in contact with me, and we'll go from there. What you can see on the slide now is various other knowledge products that the Global Alliance has developed over the last few months. And just now in the chat box, I've listed the link. So if you're interested in learning more, please go. Last month, we discussed about urban profiling in relation to the knowledge product on the left. And in the coming months, we will do the same related to resilience, displacement, and urban competencies. And this brings me, we've got 2 more slides to the next. Upcoming webinar. The exact date is TBC, but in late September, we will be holding a further webinar which talks about essentially expertise or urban expertise in urban crises, in responding to that, in recovering to that, and just as much in preparing for urban crises. So we're developing the framework for this, and it will touch on issues such as international rosters. Are they a right mechanism? What mechanisms can be used to strengthen? And the development of a recent framework led by BRHA on an urban competency framework. What skills do we need to respond in urban areas effectively? So shortly, or in the follow-up email, we will send you the link to register. And the very last thing I will say now is what you can see in the chat box is a short survey. It'll take you less than 2 minutes. And essentially this is a series in 2 of 5 or even more webinars. We have a pre-described set of topics based on these knowledge products or technical guidance below, but we don't want it to limit it to that. So if there's something that you want to discuss or you want to be discussed, please let us know. Use the survey or reach out to us, and we will do what we can to make sure that this is discussed in a webinar such as this. So on that note, thank you so much for attending, all of you. I'm very glad we had very limited technical issues, and even more so, thank you so much to our speakers, Innocent, Dionysia, Edrees, and your teams, and of course to Leah for your expert moderation. So, wishing you all a great morning, afternoon, or evening, and we will be in touch. Goodbye.